Hello and welcome to the very first episode of the R3 podcast. Rescue, Rebuild, Restore. It is a joint venture between Operation Restored Warrior and Encounter Online, and I'm so excited to be here to develop some community with those of you who are listening, and first and foremost, to introduce some amazing guys that we're pulling together for this podcast. I'm going to throw first. I'm going to let them all introduce themselves. Paul Lavelle.
Hey, everybody. My name's Paul Lavelle. I'm the founder of Operation Restored Warrior, a ministry that's been focused on the restoration and the support of our nation's veterans, active duty, first responders, police officers. And we've been doing this now since 2008. In fact, this month, we're moving into our 17th year.
Oh, right on. What about you, John?
Yeah, so I'm John Williams. I have the opportunity to serve as the Chief Operating Officer with Operation Restored Warrior, and just very excited into this new phase that Jesus is leading us into.
Fantastic. And then there's Jordan.
Yep, Jordan Fulton. I'm the Executive Director of Operations and Training at ORW, and this month for me, I've been with the organization for 11 years.
Oh, wow. I didn't know that. Well, these are the primary guys that we're going to be having most of the time here on the R3 podcast. These are the faces and voices you'll be hearing from most often. But since this is our kickoff episode, we thought we should answer some very basic questions. We said that this is a joint venture between Operation Restored Warrior and Encounter Online. Very good question. What is Operation Restored Warrior? I'm going to throw to you, John, for that one.
So Shane, Operation Restored Warrior is a ministry that deals with healing. And this is a healing. It started out, as Paul said, in 2008 for our nation's warriors, the men and women that had a lot of trauma, that had combat related issues, but as well as we realize that there's also issues that come from just trauma from being younger and throughout life. And so this ministry goes into the core of what the healing is into that. And that happens through our 5-day program. And it just gets right down to those issues. And it introduces us to who the real person of Jesus is, to allow him to come in and do that healing. You know, we've had the opportunity to work with men and women across the spectrum from every aspect of military, first responders. We've even had civilians as well as celebrities and other folks come through our program. And I think what's really unique about Operation Restored Warrior is the facilitator team. One of the things that's critical about us is we're not just a bunch of counselors. We're actually alumni of the program. And Paul has done a phenomenal job at building the team. And Paul, would you like to kind of just discuss how you put this team together?
Yeah, thanks, John. You know, from the very early starts, I was working with John Eldridge from 2004 to 2008. And I was working with a lot of the men and women that were deployed, mostly the guys. And it seemed like the folks that were in special ops community, the ops tempo was like through the ceiling. So as I started ORW, that was the group of people that I was focusing on coming back from multiple deployments that were carrying just the weight of so much of combat. And so as I put the team together, it was from really the special operations communities, from Navy SEALs, from Special Forces, from Air Force Special Operations, to Coast Guard rescue swimmers, all these folks that have seen just incredible high ops tempo, to where we are today. And look at the caliber of the men and women that are on our team right now.
Yeah,
I mean, we've got warriors from the Army that have been wounded in combat, that have Purple Hearts. We have guys that have distinguished flying crosses. We've got a couple of guys with that, which is incredible. We've got Air Force pararescuemen. We've got a couple of guys that have served in combat as PJs, the most elite rescue in the world. We've got air combat controllers that are assigned in with many of the special ops teams, with SEAL Team 6 and Delta Force. We've got Marines that were on the ground in Fallujah and Afghanistan that were hit with IEDs and were in the hospital. One was in the hospital for over 2 years.
Yeah.
We've just had incredibly gifted, talented warriors that came through our program to get their hearts back, to get their lives saved. And now they're an integral part of our team. I just felt it was really important to share the caliber of the men and the women that we have on our team.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then you've also got, you got me, who is, I have no military background whatsoever. I do serve as the creative director for Operation Restored Warrior, and I also serve as the lead pastor for Encounter Online. So that's what Operation Restored Warrior is. And then what is Encounter Online? So Encounter Online is an online faith community, and it's kind of built around the idea that no matter what people are into these days, at least part of what they're doing is part of an online community. It doesn't matter whether you're into knitting or pipe smoking or surfing, you're in some subreddit or Facebook group or Discord server. And so Encounter Online is a community that connects communities. It's a great place for you to find online allies for your spiritual journey. And also, for those of you who are already well into your spiritual journey, you may know people who may be struggling, who may be a little lost. It's an easy way for you to throw them a lifeline. You can, instead of like, hey, come to church with me, that's a tough thing to get somebody to do in the physical realm. But if you say, you know, I've been part of this online faith community and it's really made a difference to me, just check out this link. Click. Easy to pop in, no pressure, no stress. And so that's really what Encounter Online is all about. And we'll hear more about how it ties into this mission a little bit later. But still, there's one more very basic question that you've probably already been asking yourself. R3, the R3 podcast. That's an odd name. Jordan, what does the R3 in R3 podcast stand for?
Well, the Rescue, Rebuild, Restore is part of our logo. It's in our name on our emblem that we have. And it's what we do. It's the mission of Jesus. He came to heal the brokenhearted, to set the captive free, and release from darkness the prisoner. That's kind of our founding verse from Isaiah 61:1. So what does that actually look like? Well, that means you got to get your hands dirty to get into where was the damage done. That means we need to invite Jesus into those places. It means you got to be vulnerable. It means you got to be honest about where you're at and what you're dealing with. And when you can do that, that's when the restoration comes in that moment. So that's when things can get healed. That's where transformation takes place. And just as the ORW team, we help to facilitate that at our 5-day program called the Drop Zone.
Yeah. I'd love to talk a little bit about, all of this sounds great, but why do we need a podcast? How is a podcast going to advance the mission of ORW or of Encounter Online? I'd love to just have a freewheeling conversation with the four of you, but why don't you start us out, Paul? Who are we reaching out to with this podcast, and what are we trying to do with them?
Well, we have experienced over the last 17 years the absolute need for restoration in our nation, in the world, really. And we have focused on our military, veterans, active duty, first responders, mainly because they are in such need because of the suicide ideation issues that they dealt with, the numbers off the charts. The reality is that that's part of what Jordan was talking about, the rescue, the rebuild, literally going in spiritually. We call our program a drop zone for a reason. I don't like the term retreat. I hate the idea of people retreating. Yeah. And so the idea is that we literally go in and we kind of model ourselves around kind of the special operations community, in that we do so much work with those men and women that spiritually we're kind of doing what they do, only without all the munition sides of things. We're doing it spiritually to go in and to rescue, and then to rebuild them, and then to restore them. And so we have seen across the nation the need for others that are just living life, from pastors to CEOs to business owners to fathers to mothers to sons and daughters, that folks have seen what we've done. They've heard about what we've done, and they're like, how can we get this? And so we created a program, videoing both our men's program and our women's program, to get it out there. And my good friend Mike Lindell, who's been a real proponent for ORW, has helped us tremendously. He has an organization called the Lindell Recovery Network. And it kind of started in that realm of getting our program out to folks that are struggling with addiction, because the core is not addiction, right? The core is not suicide. The core is not necessarily a mental health issue. It's a spiritual assault. So we felt like, wouldn't it be great if we just were able to have conversations with everybody about what Jesus has blessed ORW with, the process and the way that we go about introducing people to Jesus. Because ultimately, Shane, Jesus is about relationship. He's not about religion. Religion is about control. It's about, directing people the way that you want them to go. We see that everywhere. And Jesus is really about relationship, right? He wants a one-on-one relationship. And I just feel like we have that treasure in the field, that we have experienced it ourselves, that we have shared it with thousands of people, and we know what's available. And so we just felt like, you know what, it's really time for us as a team, as a leader, to share anecdotally some stories of how we've experienced the person of Jesus in our lives. Hence the R3 podcast.
Fantastic. Guys, it's kind of a challenge. I'm not sure what you want to add to that, but I want to throw it to either you, John, or Jordan, whichever you want to add a little bit to why are we doing this podcast and what do we want to achieve in people's lives?
And I think it's like, just to build on what Paul was saying too, is just to bridge that gap, even with our alumni that have been through the program, to keep them involved, to keep them engaged. This is a healing process. It's not a one and done. And so, our goal is to get the stories out there. We tell the men, we let them tell their own stories, and that's why we don't have a lot of advertising, if you will. But we want to share what really truly goes on, and this is to get the interest not only of just our military, but as Paul was saying, to every man and woman that's out there as well. And so the exposure of the healing and what Jesus is doing, that's the whole purpose of the podcast, to be able to get that out there, answer those questions ahead of time, and be able to start that healing process.
Yeah, love it, man. What can you add to that, Jordan?
Yeah, we've over the years have invited civilians in various roles in society to come through, and there's really nothing that separates them from the military. Yeah. Everybody experiences pain. Everybody experiences trauma and rejection and abuse and neglect and all kinds of stuff that adds up cumulatively. And so, yes, there's a high rate among the military for suicide, but everybody needs to get their heart restored. Everybody needs some level of healing, because if you don't, then you either find addiction ways to numb it, to ignore it, or to keep driving on. And eventually you will find your place where you can't take it anymore. You don't want to deal with the problems anymore. You don't see a way out. And then you're right there on that doorstep. So we can offer this almost as like preventative care, spiritual care of the heart before you get to that place. Then we'll have overall healthier people and civilians, and it'll be just more effective in society.
Yeah. I love that. I think that the name R3 podcast, Rescue, Rebuild, Restore, really says a lot about who this is for. Really, it's exactly what Jordan was talking about. It's not just our nation's military. It's not just first responders. It's who experience traumatic heart wounds. I mean, we have a name for it for these folks, PTSD. But if you've been alive for very long, you also know that you've taken some hits, and those hits may really, really be weighing on you. And whether you have come to a point of crisis, or whether your crisis at this point is just quiet desperation, you may find yourself in a place where you need rescue, where you need somebody to enter this wounded space that you have, that you're not getting healed, that you're probably, odds are, trying to medicate in one way or another, compensate for, but not really processing, just because you don't know. Like, what do you do? How do you do that? And so the R3 team, Operation Restored Warrior, primarily will come in and bring a rescue. We'll bring a spiritual special ops team to bear on the wounds that you're struggling with. And that leads to rebuilding you, healing the heart, actually processing in a healthy and full way the wounds that you've taken through the power of the healer, Jesus, who is the only one who has the ability to truly heal these level of heart wounds. And once that healing has been found, restoration, restore. That's part of where Encounter Online comes in. But once you have been rescued and the healing has come and you've been rebuilt, you're ready to be restored to the purposes of God that in your wounded state you weren't fully able to inhabit. You know, that what John promises and what Jesus promises, I think it's John 10:10, guys, help me. I came that they might have life and have it to the full, have it in rich abundance, whatever your translation. I love what it says. So we want to work together to restore you to that fullness of life, which really is what you're invited into, especially as followers of Jesus. But I'm going to open this up for conversation. What if, okay, we've mentioned Jesus a couple of times. We've used the words faith community. What if there's somebody out there who's like, look, dude, I kind of like what Paul said about not liking religion. You know, I kind of like that, but I don't know about the whole Jesus thing. So I'm probably out of here. Would one of you guys like to address what this podcast might have to offer somebody like that?
Well, I think with a podcast, it's almost like looking in the window of a house. You're not really committed because you're not inside the house in the conversation. You're just listening. If you don't like it, you can just keep moving and whatever. But it does, we can address questions and things that you're curious about in a way that's not in a very non-threatening situation for you. We probably actually prefer to have people on that really don't know anything about Jesus. I feel like we have just a unique, pretty raw expression of who Jesus is without the drapings of religion on him. And so let's have a conversation about that. What does he actually look like in real life? What does that mean on everyday relationships and just how you live your life? What does it mean to follow him? Let's have those conversations in a way that you can just look in the window and see if that's intriguing and you want to eventually come inside, or you just want to sit from the outside and just take a glance in.
Yeah,
that's good.
Paul, could you comment briefly on you are the one who's been doing this from the get-go since 2008. In all of that time, what percentage of folks who have come through the ORW program, what percentage of those would say that they're followers of Jesus, and what percentage aren't?
Well, I don't know that I have that number, Shane. I do know that there's been quite a broad spectrum of folks that have come. I do know that once they do come, the reasons that get them there can be that they're absolutely bottomed out. They've tried every way to try to get some restoration, find some freedom. But once they get there, they are introduced to this person of Jesus that is not this religious thing that they have had in their minds. I was one of those guys. I wanted absolutely nothing to do with the whole religious setup of things. There's a place, obviously, in the church for the church and that sort of thing, but a lot of people are wounded throughout their lives, and so they've got this image of who Jesus is, and they think he's either, this condemning, judgmental type person, or that he's a Mr. Rogers, and he's just so passive. And, the reality is that he is absolutely, he is none of those things. He's kind, he's powerful, he's strong. If you just read scripture, one of the things I love about recent movies and shows that are out, the advent and the impact of the series The Chosen, the impact of that thing that just kind of went viral, through the internet. And now I think they're on their 5th or 6th season.
Yeah.
But the impact of how they show Jesus, that he's funny, his guys are just knuckleheads. I mean, they really are. They're just ordinary guys. And Jesus is out there and the things that he says. And I just love the way that they portray this guy, right? And he's kind, he's tough, he's to the point. He's merciful. He's graceful. He's condemning when condemning needs to be, done. And I don't mean that in really a negative way, but he calls out, the things that are not not right. And I look at that, and over the past 17 years, I just kind of followed that guy. I had some guidance that said, if you talk like Jesus, if you act like Jesus, and if you represent him, you should get the same outcome. So it was a guy from, a science background, medical background, military background. I figured I'm going to test that hypothesis. And I did test it. And every single time it works. So whether they were believers coming in, when they leave, they meet the person of Jesus, they are believers. I mean, Jordan, I think you've been here for 11 years. I think you can absolutely confirm that. And again, it's like, man, people coming like, I'm not going in. I'm not going to be a Christian. I'm not doing that. And then they come out and like, you know what? I really don't want to leave. I want to know more about who this guy is. Right. Yeah. It's because it's an authentic process of how we introduce them to Jesus.
Yeah. So good.
I love that. So let me throw something to you, John. We've been working on the ideas behind this podcast and some potential upcoming podcasts for quite some time. Paul just talked about why, even if you're not somebody who's a follower of Jesus, why this may be a podcast for you. Thinking ahead to all of the things that we're going to cover, could you talk about some of the very practical ways, apart from Jesus, but just very practical ways that this podcast may have things to offer to folks?
Yeah, I think it just goes through, a lot of the things we're going to talk about. And, we talk about our story and we share authentically what's happened in my life. I love to share my story now. And this is a story that for 46 years, I didn't want to tell anybody. I was just going to tell you enough to get you to leave me alone. And so it offers that opportunity for the conversation to share what life truly is. Life is tough. We take hits. We continue to take hits. There's a lot of growing to do continually, even with that relationship with Jesus. And so I think what this podcast has to offer as well is that it isn't a one and done, that this is a continuation. This is something that we continue to walk through and grow. It's an ability for people that maybe have never shared their story. Maybe they just met Jesus. Maybe they've been walking with him their entire life, but they're not sure how to share their story. And this is a perfect place for that because it's something that we've all been through. The beauty that all the facilitators within Operation Restored Warrior are actually alumni of the program themselves. It's not, we weren't just hired on here because we're all good looking and have great beards. We're all alumni that have gone through the program to get that restoration, to get that healing. And so it's phenomenal to come on here and share what Jesus continues to do in our lives in the day-to-day, how it happens, how we operate within our families, how we operate with our marriage, how we operate in our jobs, in society. So it's not just about the church type atmosphere or always the bad and the doom and gloom, but how to live from that restored heart and live your life to the fullest. That's what it's truly about.
Well said. Well said, my brother. So at Encounter Online, we have this saying, we say a lot, that everyone is on a spiritual journey. And I believe that that's true. And that's why I love what John said about sharing his story, regardless of what sort of flavor your spiritual journey is on, whatever it might be, wherever it may be focused. Like if you think about it, I'm guessing you'll go, I guess I am on some level on a spiritual journey. And so at the very least, this is a place where you can lock arms with other people who are on a spiritual journey, who, regardless of what you believe, are ready to take a journey with you. And at the core of the spiritual journey is people's stories. There is such tremendous truth in people's stories. A lot of people say, well, and my truth is this, and my truth is this, but when you get into somebody's story, it's kind of something you can't argue. And there's something transcendent that I believe can educate every heart when you hear somebody's story. So we're going to be sharing a lot of amazing stories. And that's it, really, for this first introductory episode of the R3 podcast. I'm super excited to go on a journey with all of you. I'm excited to journey with these guys, and we have many, many special guests coming up. I want to ask a favor. If you listen to podcasts, you know how this works. The best thing that you can do is like and follow, like and subscribe and comment.
Yeah.
When you do those things, the R3 podcast becomes more and more visible, and also it's super easy to share, especially if you know somebody who may be at that rescue stage, whether it's quiet desperation or total crisis. This is a great thing to share. So gentlemen, thank you for hanging out with me, and all of you listening, thanks for starting this journey with us. And we'll see you next time.
Yep.